Hi, this is Max Keiser. This is Keiser Report Summer Solutions. Oh my gosh, we just sorted it all out during this series. Now, today we're covering the de-dollarization, deglobalization, and what comes next with investment manager Lawrence Lepard. Lawrence, welcome.
Welcome. Thanks, Max and Stacy, for having me. Appreciate it.
So, Lawrence, I guess, obviously we ended July hitting new all-time highs in gold. Silver is also on a tear. It's quite a ways from its all-time high, however. And what I want to ask is really how much this economist cover free money when government spending knows no limits. Is the free money, it was never free, and we could see that in gold prices.
Free money is good to keep the system rolling. Obviously, that's why they put it in place. But the issue, of course, is what's the underlying value of the money. And, fiat money is in the process of dying. And I think that's what we're all observing very notably. It's reflected in gold and silver prices.
Right. You say they can print all the money they want, but doesn't mean that it has value. And we've lived in a world of fiat money since 1971, where the value is always based on a relative valuation to other fiat money, right? There's been this crazy kind of Mobius strip or self-referential or crazy daisy chain where all these big economies are just printing and they refer to each other with their printed money. And it just seems historic in that when this bubble in fiat money bursts, and this is by far the biggest bubble we've probably ever seen in history, there's no bottom to it really. The whole thing can just crash. And we're talking about hundreds of trillions of fiat money disappearing, Lawrence.
Right. And I think it's hard for a lot of people to get their mind around. They just don't even want to go there because the implications of a fiat collapse with the global reserve currency are very, very severe and somewhat sad, obviously, the implications for society. But setting that aside, I mean, it's what happens. You set the system up with Bretton Woods, the dollar being the reserve currency, and all tied to gold. And then, of course, that ended in August 1571. And, they all have been self-referential, as you point out. The dollar's been the cleanest dirty shirt. There's somebody on Twitter that, says milkshake theory because everyone needs dollars and is short dollars. The dollar will remain strong, and it has. My view is that that's true to the extent that people need dollars, but eventually what happens when there's an alternative to the dollar and it becomes clear that the issuing authority is not trustworthy and has really been running a large Ponzi scheme, which is what's been happening. And the metals are here to call the lie on the fundamental value of the dollar. And it's tragic, and it's potentially rather scary and has some bad implications. I'm quite an optimist, though. I actually think that the system is broken, needs to be fixed, and that there's a good other side to it. Once we get through what will no doubt be a difficult period.
You mentioned 1971 when we went off the gold standard. Richard Nixon closed the gold window after France asked for $300 million worth of their gold back in the trade deficit going on. And then soon after that, the United Kingdom asked for their gold, which was also happened to be about $300 million worth. And Richard Nixon instead closed the gold window and handed back. England instead got some dollars. So in this moment today in 2020, do you think Elvira Nabiullina, who is the head of the Central Bank of Russia, that she will kind of be seen as that equivalent of Charles de Gaulle, the Charles de Gaulle of central bankers, in that the Russian central bank has been stockpiling gold. Over the past 3 years, they bought $521 billion worth. So do you think they might be seen as kind of the last huge buyer, the last central bank able to even get gold in exchange for dollars?
Yeah, in an answer, absolutely yes. It's not just her. I mean, it was Jacques Ruff who counseled de Gaulle to demand the gold, and he was right, obviously. But also the Chinese. I was in touch with a very intelligent Swiss investor over the weekend, and his view, and I strongly support it, is that a combination of China and Russia will be the two countries that will lead us back to having currency backed by the precious metals. and they've both been preparing for it. I mean, if you look at, the behind the scenes purchases, I'm sure China has multiples of what they report in gold reserves, that they've probably got 20,000 plus tons of gold reserves. And as a result, it would not surprise me at all when the thing comes crashing down that the first two currencies that go to a gold backing are China and Russia. Now, China's got a big credit bubble too, so that's going to be tricky. But Russia's actually in a very, very good position. They have, very low debt. They don't run large deficits, et cetera. And they've got a large natural resource economy as well. So I think those two countries have been playing the long game on the currency side and will benefit as a result of having done so.
Right. So, Lawrence, to follow up on China, Russia, what you're saying there is also a lot of tension that's been building up between these two, particularly U.S. and China. For years, it was always about this symbiotic relationship that these two would never come to blows because they have such a great system going where we export the jobs to them and they export cheap goods to us. But now it's looking like it's getting increasingly more of a problem, and there's a Thucydides trap in the mix. The U.S. dollar itself is coming under attack. So is part of a conflict between these two countries. Can you see that developing?
Yeah, very much. I mean, Graham Ellison's Thucydides trap, I think, is dead right. And it, obviously the embassy, moves last week. And then if you look at what's come out of the White House, I mean, there's a policy paper out of there talking about dealing with them as a strategic competitor. And then if you look at Doug Nolan's credit bubble bulletin this Saturday, he had some great stuff in it about Mike Pompeo and the speech he recently made. And there's no doubt that, our interests and China's interests are not aligned. And, I think the tension is going to continue to grow. What I'm hoping and praying is that, we can actually get through a complete worldwide currency collapse without, slaughtering 40 or 50 million souls the way we did in the last large fourth turning, which, obviously was the Depression, World War II era. So, it's entirely possible to do a currency reset and not have people die, but it's not always the case. So we'll just have to see how it unfolds.
But regarding that relationship with China, Mike Pompeo did accuse them of economic blitzkrieg. But what is the role of the United States in that? And in particular, the structure that is the US dollar. By necessity, it needs to run massive trade deficits in order to have the global reserve currency. So I know everybody in this space hates Keynes, but Keynes did warn that they would have to run huge deficits in order to.
No doubt. He had it right at Bretton Woods in that respect. I mean, the Bancor was not a bad idea and was not the direction they went. They went with the dollar as the reserve currency. And, it's Triffin's dilemma, right? Without a way of satisfying in a neutral reserve asset, we have to run deficits and they have to, we ship our jobs to them and they take our paper and send their junk to us. And so it's got to all be restructured. I mean, there's no doubt about this. And probably the best thinker on this, I'm sure you're aware of it, and many of your listeners are as well, is Luke Groman, who's done a very nice job of kind of writing about and unfolding how, there's a call for a neutral global reserve asset. And, there are a lot of potential candidates, but, having the dollar as the reserve asset, I think we've hit the end of the line there because we're too far in debt. And, the math is falling apart on them now. I mean, you can't take the reserve asset into negative interest rates and not have the whole thing collapse. So it's a mess. There's no doubt it's a mess, but, there's some encouraging signs. I mean, I think the fact that they're willing to even consider putting Judy Shelton on the Fed board indicates to me that somebody there is saying, hey, you know what, we got some real issues in this area. And let's get somebody who actually has thought this through to have a seat at the table. I mean, when she came up in front of the Senate hearings, I mean, they treated her with just disdain. And I think I'm guessing it came out of the DOD. Yeah, right. No surprise. It came out of the DOD or somebody whispered in somebody's ear and said, no. We want her at the table when this whole thing goes down because there's a lot of stuff going down that's going to be important. So I thought that was interesting.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned you can't have the world reserve currency go into negative interest rates, but every single week, rates for U.S. Treasury paper gets lower and lower and lower. And a lot of people are now saying, they could go negative. Donald Trump has said he'd like it to go negative. And so, is it possible to go negative? What does that mean? Number two, kind of to go with that question, I noticed that no matter how much they print, money velocity keeps collapsing towards zero. Are those two things related?
I think they are, Max. I mean, I think as others have pointed out, I mean, the reason it's zero is there's so much of it out there. It's not flowing around. I mean, think about trying to get money, think about water in a bucket, trying to get it flowing around versus trying to get water flowing around in a lake. It's a lot easier to swirl it around the bucket when there's less of it. There's so much money, there's no velocity. I don't know the answer to your question of can they take the reserve currency rates negative. I suppose they can. I guess I can't see why not if they made the choice. They've stated they will not do it. And I guess I tend to take them at their word on that. I think what they prefer to do is just get them so low and leave them there and guarantee that they will stay there, that effectively the real interest rate, which is what drives the price of gold and drives the Gresham's law substitutes, the real interest rate is so deeply negative that they do get the inflation. And, I think that as I wrote in my last quarterly letter, I think that what's going on here is they're okay with the gold price going up. Now, they probably don't want it going up quite as quickly as it's going up now, because eventually Gresham's law will kick in and they'll be in a lot of trouble. And I'm sure they've got some tricks up their sleeve to slow it down. But, it's definitely, I think their plan is to run deeply negative rates. That's my belief, and to create inflation. And they know they have to do it. They absolutely know it.
Right. Lawrence Lepard, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, pick up on this conversation. Fascinating stuff. Dollar, gold, hyper Bitcoinization is coming up right after the break. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Summer solutions. That's right. We sorted it all out. We got all the answers with Lawrence Lepard. We're going to continue our conversation with Lawrence. Lawrence, I wanted to pick it up and ask you about the gold Dow ratio. This is something that's been, bouncing around financial markets and discussions for a long time, that every now and again, the price of gold equals the level of the Dow Jones. We saw it at 800 back in the early 1980 period. We saw it again in the, I believe, 2011 period. If we get back to a Dow gold ratio of 1, that would imply either gold goes up to multiple, of higher of 20,000, or the Dow is going to come down from its 25,000 level down to 10,000, or some combination of the both. Where do you think this is going?
Yeah, I have no idea, and I don't really have the solution, but I do believe that they are converging, because the Dow represents a group of stocks that are driven by a credit bubble that's in the process of collapsing, and gold is still deeply, deeply undervalued in relation to its substitute, which is base money and credit. And so I think there's almost no doubt that the ratio, which is in kind of the 5, 6, well, no, it's higher than that. It's, what is it today? 21,000 or 26,500 divided by 1,900. So it's 13.9 today, and it's extreme. It could be as low as 1-to-1. So if it gets to 1-to-1, if we go Zimbabwe, it'll be $100,000 Dow and $100,000 gold. If we do something less than that, it could be $30,000 or 30,000 Dow and $30,000 gold. It all depends. I mean, the correct price for gold is a function of, well, first of all, gold is the numeraire. So really, gold is just priced in ounces, right? So an ounce of gold is an ounce of gold. What you want to measure against that, I would submit, is other things, and the dollar has been the world reserve currency, so there's one way of measuring it. But you could also measure it in barrels of oil or amount of Bitcoin or other sorts of things. But yes, we're going to a ratio that's going to be much more in favor of gold than the Dow, because we're still very much at the high end of the range of the two, if you look at a 100-year series. So I agree with you on that, Max.
Okay, so let's talk hyper Bitcoinization. As as we see the fiat system disintegrate, and everybody sees this, everybody's talking about it now, the likes of Ray Dalio, the likes of Stan Druckenmiller, and the likes of Paul Tudor Jones. Paul Tudor Jones has a huge position in gold. He, however, has also started investing in Bitcoin, saying that this will be the fastest horse in this race. Do you agree with him and his position in Bitcoin and what he sees, the reason for it? He sees inflation coming. He sees these negative real rates. He sees that the central banks have lost control.
Completely. I mean, his second quarter letter was brilliant. I own a lot of Bitcoin. I'm a huge Bitcoin fan. And I think it probably at the end of the day will be the fastest horse in the race. And I think it's actually a contender for a part of the whole solution of world reserve currency. It could be the numeraire. Having said all of that, it's still only 11 years old or 12 years old. And so, adoption is very early on. And I like to view it as it's a call option on fiat collapse, and it's a call option on technology. And I love it. I own it. But I also love gold, and I own more gold, and I own more gold mining stocks because I've got a 5,000-year track record, and I don't have to rely on an electrical grid, which I think ultimately will become quite stable. But I think there's merit to both. And I find it funny and sad on Twitter when people go at each other. The Bitcoin people go at the gold people, or vice versa, because I keep saying same team, same team. Let's go after the fiat bugs. They're the ones that are ripping us all off and that have really, damaged this country and this world, honestly. I mean, I live for the day that Ben Bernanke will be in the history books right beside John Law, and it's coming. I can just tell that it's coming. So
tell the audience who John Law is and his role in monetary history.
I think most of your audience knows if they're watching your show, but John Law was a English financier who went over to France and convinced the French monarchy that they could print money to excess, and he blew a bubble in the South Sea bubble, and then he absconded with all the gold, and the whole thing collapsed. So he was the first large-scale money printer in the history of the world. That may not be true. There may have been others, but he's the first modern large-scale money printer in history, and it was one hell of a Ponzi scheme that he ran. And I honestly think that when Bernanke, came out with his misinterpretation of the Great Depression and his helicopter money speech, that he was channeling John Law, it's taken a little while to play out, but it's really the same thing.
Right. So to follow up on the John Law, Ben Bernanke analogy. So with John Law, it's a colorful history. A guy, he rode into Paris and he bamboozled the king, and monetary history was created in this huge Ponzi scheme. Interestingly, though, when Bernanke he took over from Alan Greenspan, as Alan Greenspan created this idea that markets could be assuaged with money printing. And we had the Greenspan put, which means that anytime markets went down, Greenspan would bail them out and print more money. Then Bernanke took over, then Janet Yellen took over, and now Jay Powell has taken over. So you got 4 successive Fed chairmen and women who have engaged in this obvious fraud. With Bernanke, he had a very bad poker face, and you could tell he didn't believe a word he was saying. He was just setting himself up for that job at Citadel when he got out of the Fed and cash in, as so many politicians and policy and Fed chairmen do. But it's interesting in that we've had now 35 years of this fraud, and it goes from chairman to chairman to chairwoman to chairman. And as a result, the subsequent crash and devastation could make what happened in France look like a picnic. Because France went into a severe economic tailspin. The whole country crashed. And I think this crash that these 4 Fed folks set up could be bigger, Lawrence.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Max. I mean, you've had hyperinflations before in history, Weimar and Argentina and others, and generally there's something sound you can go to. You haven't had the world reserve currency go to hyperinflation, at least to the best of my knowledge, until, since the times of the Roman Empire. when Rome collapsed, and that led to the Dark Ages. And so, yeah, it could be pretty bad. And I think that's tragic and unfortunate, and makes what they've done all the more criminal. And you're right, it wasn't any one of them that did it. They each took a step. And, as one of my friends in this business says, they all just kind of figured out a way to take the bribe. They could have done the right thing, but nah, let's just take the bribe. And, Nixon took the bribe, and then, Greenspan took the bribe. I mean, Greenspan used to be an Ayn Rand, gold is great guy. And then he decided being famous was better, and he sold out, and so on and so on. So, they've all kind of taken the bribe, and it is going to be tragic, no doubt.
Let's talk about the upside to all of this in our Summer Solutions special, because, Max and I have lived in Europe for quite a long time. And if you read about the 1800s or the late 1800s and early 1910s and 20s in Europe, you see that, they ran empires. They were imperial powers. They were colonial powers. And yet the people themselves lived horribly. Now they live amazingly well. So many people in France have second homes. They vacation for 8 weeks a year. They have a much better lifestyle than the average American. When we do lose our exorbitant privilege, isn't that exorbitant privilege just reserved for a very, very, very select few? I mean, the fact that we have mass unemployment and mass opioid overdose can be tied to this problem of the exorbitant privilege, that the elite really don't need the population at all.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. There's a lot to go on there. And, the one thing I will say, I mean, to people who are despondent about all of these problems and this fourth turning that we're in the process of going through, as bad as it looks, I have read a lot about hyperinflations. I've studied hyperinflations. And if we don't get into wars and kill each other, all the assets are still there. All we need to do is transfer the wealth into the right hands. And, if you actually, and then not make political mistakes. I mean, if you actually study Weimar carefully, a guy came in after the Weimar collapse in Germany in 23, shocked, and he cleaned it all up. They went to the gold standard, and bang, the country was cooking again in 2 years. All the stuff was still there. The auto manufacturers and the machine tool people, they were all making stuff. And once you fix the money, you fix the fundamental underlying broken problem, and the society will get better and fairer for everybody. It's just critical. You've got to fix the money. Now, in that case, the tragedy is they were also hurt and beat up and pained that they went and elected Hitler. And, but that's a different matter. Their economy was running fine. They were just that they'd all been wiped out, as a result of von Havenstein and what he did.
And so to follow up on that, the money printing that went on, and you had mentioned that the big reset that's coming can be done so peacefully. We don't need a war. We can do so peacefully. At the same time, we have something brand new in the history of monetary history, is a money, Bitcoin, that is not attached to any state. So it's state-free money. That's never happened before. So it seems to me that that's really the only path to a peaceful reset, is to go with the only store of value, the gold equivalent that's not attached to any flag, Lawrence.
I agree with you, Max. Although I think gold can play the same role in a way. It's not quite as good in the sense that you don't know who has what. But I think gold can be a neutral reserve asset, and 6,000 years of history supports that. But I would agree with you. And I think part of the beauty of the fourth turning, if you can call it that, because of the pain we're going to go through, is large. I think part of the beauty of it is all of these big organizations are just going to collapse. These big federal governments, they're going to collapse. We don't need them. I mean, who needs this stuff? Who needs these jumbo jets? Who needs these aircraft carriers? Who needs these big armies? Who needs these nuclear weapons? I mean, our grandkids are going to look at this and say, what were they thinking? Why did they have all that stuff? It just doesn't make any sense. But, unfortunately, you're going to have to see a collapse. And, there might have to be some pitchforks, and there's going to have to be a lot of civil resistance, because some of the elites and some of the powerful that are in control of the government are going to fight like hell to prevent us from resetting it and making it right again. I think those of us who are standing there, prepared to, to stand up for sound money and for the right principles, for term limits, for limited government, for smaller governments. We're going to be believed, and the people who've been pushing this false system that has enriched the elites, they're going to be seen for the liars that they are. They're going to be, they're going to be in jail.
Yeah, you're right, Lawrence. I should point out that you gave out your email address a while ago, and you got so many requests, you can't handle them all, but you're going to try and get to them at some point in the future, I think is the best we can hope for. Thanks for being on Summer Solutions, Lawrence.
Oh, thank you, guys. I really enjoy your show, and it was great to be with you.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of Keiser Report, Summer Solutions with me, Max Keiser, Stacy Herbert. Special thanks to our guest, Lawrence Lepard. If you want to catch us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.